guys will go ahead and have a seat and turn your direction towards the stage.
Hugsamek! Get your programs here. Free programs on Shabbat. There you go. Get your programs. Have a program, ma'am? There you go. Get your free programs here. Free programs on Shabbat. Hugsamek! We're here today to tell you the real news about why we should all celebrate Purim. You see, we take it as a fact what Esther 9:28 says, that these days of Purim should be remembered throughout every generation, every family, every region, and every city. And how these days of Purim should never cease among Jews or their memory be lost by their descendants forever. We must not forget about a young Jewish girl named Esther who lived in Persia long ago, and about how God used her to save her people from an evil plan designed for their destruction. Esther's story begins here. Long ago in Persia, ruled King Ahasuerus in the city of Shushan. The king had been showing off the dazzling wealth of his kingdom for 180 days. After this time, he held a 7-day banquet for all the people. Those who were great and small attended this marvelous banquet in the palace courtyard. At the same time, Queen Vashti was holding a banquet for the women of the royal house. King Ahasuerus, wanting to display the beauty of his gorgeous queen, requested that she come before him at his banquet wearing her crown. But the queen refused. This made the king mad, so he banished Queen Vashti from the land. A law was then sent to all the kingdom: all wives honor and obey your husbands. There was in Shushan, the capital, a man who's a Jew, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Yair, the son of Shimi, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. He had been exiled from Jerusalem with captives of Israel. Mordecai raised Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, because her own mother and father had died. Mordecai adopted her as his own daughter. Now the king had decreed that a search be made for a new queen in place of Vashti. Girls were rounded up from far and near and brought before the king. Esther, too, was taken into the king's house and put under the care of Hegai, who was in charge of the women. Mordecai had instructed Esther not to tell anyone that she was a Jew, and she obeyed Mordecai just as she had always done. While we're waiting, let me tell you a little story about Mrs. Swartz in room 102. A woman called the switchboard of a hospital and asked how Mrs. Swartz in room 102 was doing. The switchboard operator put her on hold for a minute, then came back and reported, "Mrs. Swartz in room 102 is doing very well. Why, just this morning her lab work came back and everything is normal. Her doctor is pleased and says she will be able to go home next week." "Hooray!" shouted the caller. "You must be a relative to be so happy," observed the switchboard operator. "No," explained the caller. "I'm Mrs. Swartz in room 102. Nobody tells me anything." And Mrs. Swartz is a smart one. Here's another one about Shlomo and the bear. Shlomo is out in the woods when he comes across a bear. Frightened for his life, Shlomo runs as fast as he can to escape this bear and manages to hide in a cave. But he is horrified to find that the bear has run after him into the cave and Shlomo is trapped. He closes his eyes and begins to recite Shema Israel in anticipation of his final moments. When he is finished, he opens his eyes and is surprised to see the bear in front of him, with his eyes closed, also praying in Hebrew. Oh, we ready? Oh. Goody. All the women that were rounded up went through 1 year of beautification before they could come before the king. Esther had found favor with the caregiver, so she received the best of everything. After this time of beautification, each young lady was then presented to the king. The king liked Esther more than any of his wives, so he put the royal crown on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. The king then gave a great banquet in Esther's honor for all his officers and servants, decreed a holiday for the provinces, and distributed gifts worthy of royal bounty. Esther was admired by all who saw her. Alright, where was I? Shlomo's out in the woods, he comes across a bear, the bear's about to charge him, and... Alright. When he is finished, he opens his eyes and is surprised to see the bear in front of him with his eyes closed, also praying in Hebrew. Shlomo thinks to himself, how lucky am I to be cornered by what must be the only Jewish bear in the area? We're mishpacha, I'm saved. And then he listens more carefully to the bear's prayer. Hamotze lechem min haaretz. Blessed are you, our Lord, who brings forth bread from the earth. Amen. Yikes. Now Esther's cousin Mordecai would walk around in front of the courtyard in order to know how Esther was doing and what was happening to her. One day while he was there, Mordecai overheard two of the royal guards conspiring to assassinate the king. Mordecai immediately notified Esther about the plot to kill the king. Queen Esther quickly reported this to the king, and Mordecai was credited. The matter was investigated, found to be true, and both gods were hung on the gallows. All this was recorded in a daily journal that was kept with the king. The plot thickens, and now our story becomes quite bad. Haman! Was an evil man. He was the king's #1 man. Everyone would bow to him throughout the land. Everyone bowed to Haman! Except Mordecai, Esther's cousin, a Jew who honored God alone. This angered Haman! So he decided he would find a way to kill Mordecai and all the Jews. He got the king to pass a law to have all the Jews murdered. All the Jews were terrified. Mordecai tore his clothes and went to go tell Queen Esther. Esther? Where's Esther? There she is! He told Esther that if she didn't go to the king, not one of the Jews would survive, including her. Who knows? Maybe God has put you in this position of royalty for such a time as this. Esther knew that if she went into the king's presence without being summoned, she could be put to death. Esther told her cousin to tell everyone to pray and fast for 3 days with her and her attendants. Then she will do as Mordecai has asked. Oh, hey. Did you hear the one about the kippah? Never mind. It'll go over your head. On the 3rd day, Esther approached the king's throne. The king sees his lovely queen and extends his scepter. Now Esther was both beautiful and wise. She told the king that she had prepared a wonderful banquet for him and Haman. Both men eagerly agreed to attend and enjoy the banquet. After they were full and happy, the king told Esther that whatever she wanted, even half the kingdom, it would be hers. But Esther kept silent about the evil plot planned by Haman. Instead, Esther asked them both to dine with her again, and they accepted. let me tell you about the frequent noise complaint in Flatbush. There was once this fellow who did not own a watch. Whenever he wanted to know the time, he would simply ask someone, "Why didn't you just buy a watch?" A coworker finally snapped at him after being asked one time too many. "Why should I buy a watch when I can simply ask?" "Well," asked his coworker, "what do you do in the middle of the night?" "I use a shofar," said the fellow. "A shofar?" "Yes, whenever I want to know the time, I go to the window, I blow the shofar, and all my neighbors start yelling, 'What are you doing? It's 2 in the morning!'" And as you can see, houses being bought in that area frequently decreased. As Haman walked home after the banquet, he passed by the king's gate. As usual, all bowed before Haman. Except Mordecai. He went home angry and discussed the matter with his wife and friends. They advised him to build gallows 75 feet high, and in the morning, speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on it. Haman liked the idea so much, he had the gallows built immediately. Did you hear about the... on my paper. Did you hear about the Israeli archaeologist? An archaeologist was digging in the Negev desert in Israel and came upon a casket containing a mummy, a rather rare occurrence in Israel, to say the least. After examining it, he called Abe, the curator of the Israeli Museum in Jerusalem. "I just discovered a 3,000-year-old mummy of a man who died of heart failure," the excited scientist exclaimed. Abe replied, "Bring him in, we'll check it out." A week later, the amazed Abe called the archaeologist. "You were right about both the mummy's age and the cause of death. How in the world did you know?" "Easy. It was a piece of paper in his hand that said 10,000 shekels on Goliath." Eh? That night, the king couldn't sleep, so he had his servant read from his daily journal. It was found written that Mordecai had reported the assassination plot his 2 gods had planned. The king also realized that he did not honor Mordecai for this. The next morning, Haman returns to the palace with his plan for Mordecai's death. Before he can make his request, the king asked Haman, what should be done for the man the king wishes to honor? Haman thinking the king is wanting to honor him, says the king should give the man a royal robe, ride the king's horse as someone parades around him declaring, this is what is done for the man whom the king wishes to honor. The king, excited at the idea, tells Haman to do this for Mordecai. At the banquet the very next evening, the king told Esther to ask him anything, and it shall be hers. Esther told the king about Haman. She told him of his evil plan to kill all the Jews in the land, which included her, because she was a Jew. The king was so angry, he stood up and stomped away. Haman begged and pleaded at Esther's side. When the king came back in and saw this, he was furious and had Haman taken away and hung on the very gallows he had made for Mordecai. The king gave the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Esther the queen, who in turn gave it to Mordecai. Esther told the king of her relationship with Mordecai, and the king gave Mordecai a signet ring, which he had taken back from Haman. Mordecai's sackcloth and ashes were taken away, and he was clothed in royal blue and white, wearing a large gold crown and a robe of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan shouted for joy. Boomerang. For the Jews, all was light, gladness, joy, and honor. In every province and city where the king's order and decree arrived, the Jews had gladness and joy, a feast and a holiday. Many from the land became Jews because fear of the Jews had overcome them. And a decree went out from Queen Esther that said these days should be remembered and observed throughout every generation, every family, every region, and every city. And these days of Purim should never cease among Jews, or that memory be lost by their descendants forever. The end.